بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, we start with the blessings of God. Today's lecture from King Faisal Center for Research and Islamic Studies in Riyadh in cooperation with Center for Strategic Studies in Cairo. And I would like to welcome the attendees, and I'd like also to welcome our colleagues, participants in this meeting, Dr. Nermin Tawfiq, specialized researcher in the African Affairs and the General Coordinator of Faro Center for Strategic Studies, and also Mr. Tikwag Peter from Sudan, also from the University of Cairo University. He's a researcher. Ms. Asma Al-Husseini, also Al-Ahram newspaper from Cairo. Abdul Qadir Muhammad Ali is a researcher from Eritrea, specialized in the African Horn matters. We'll be speaking about a lecture titled "The Current Situations in the African Horn in Light of the Developments Witnessed in all of Sudan, Ethiopia, and Somalia as a foundation, and Eritrea as well." We will be discussing the general aspects as well as discussing these from the point of view of the important points that are witnessed by Ethiopia that has implications on the African Horn and East Africa in general. But this does not prevent us, or it doesn't mean that they are not going also to speak about the situations, internal situations in the countries that they are specialized in, as well as the relation between these countries and Ethiopia within the light of the current developments and circumstances. In the beginning, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Nermin to start her lecture. After that, we'll go back to the rest of the professors. Go ahead, Dr. Nermin. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, I'd like to thank you very much at the King Faisal Center for Research and Islamic Studies for this important topic and this important opportunity. I'd like to express my gratitude and on behalf of myself and Faros Center for Consulting and Strategy Studies. And I'd like to welcome my colleagues, specialists in the African field. This lecture in which we're going to speak about the African Horn, its importance and the importance of its countries. Of course, what happens there affects the whole region. So we hope that this will be a fruitful lecture. And I'd like to reiterate my thankfulness for you all. And now it's for Dr. Muhammad. Thank you, Dr. Nermin. So, as we mentioned, we will tackle the situations in the African Horn within these axes that we're going to tackle. The future of the crisis in Ethiopia, the different situations in Sudan with Sheikh Mahmoud, the new president, and also the future of terrorism and its impact on the African Horn and East Africa in general. The crisis, the political crisis in Sudan, and the relation on what is the relation between Sudan and Ethiopia regarding the border clashes and tensions between both countries. Also, the Eritrean intervention that happened during the internal war between the Tigray and the federal government, and how this will impact the future of the region after the journey or the path of reconciliation and between the two parties in Ethiopia. Also, we will be speaking about the future of the relation between Ethiopia and South Sudan, especially that at one time they were like allies in a way or another. So in the beginning, I'd like to remind you that there is simultaneous interpretation to English. So if you would like to listen to the English interpretation, you can click on the interpretation icon at the bottom of the screen uh, on the shape of the globe, and you can choose the English channel. The first speaker will be Ms. Asma Al-Husseini, the chief editor of Al-Ahram newspaper and the expert in the African affairs in general. Go ahead, Ms. Asma. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent and Merciful, I'd like to start by congratulating Dr. Muhammad Subeti, the head of the African Studies Unit at the King Faisal Center for Research in Islamic Studies. I'd like to thank him for this kind invitation to discuss important incidents in an important area, not only in Africa, but also it is very important for us in the Arab world. And the two regions are and overlapping a lot, and the incidents that are happening now in East Africa and in the African Horn are darkening, uh, showing darkening circumstances for all the Arab world. And I'd like to congratulate and to greet Dr. Nermeen Tawfiq, the General Coordinator of Faris Center, for this invitation. I'd like to greet my two colleagues, Mr. Mikwa Tikwa Jbeker and also Mr. Abdul Qadir Muhammad Ali. As for the developments of the situation in the African Horn, all countries of the African Horn witnessed great developments in the whole world, and we all have seen the incidents in Ethiopia and the bloody war that happened there and had a lot of big consequences, because when there is shedding of light, when there is a bloodshed based on racist basis, it won't end soon. It needs long-term treatment. And Eritrea intervention in this conflict also shed a light on some of the situations in the country and Eritrea and the condemnations of the international community for Eritrea. So in Ethiopia, things were affected also and if impacted at the same time at Sudan. And this is the main theme that I'm going to talk about. There were mutual condemnations and accusations from Ethiopia, that was a main player in all of the Sudan causes before Ethiopia led the negotiations between the north and south of Sudan. Before they led the negotiations in South Sudan and in Sudan itself, and they played an important role after the Sudan revolution to achieve the document and the charter that ruled the transition area and mediation from Abiy Ahmed that visited Sudan, and all political powers welcomed his initiative. But after the incidents that Sudan Ethiopia accused Sudan of intervention, and Al-Fashaka area witnessing many clashes and the escalation that happened during a Nahda or Renaissance dam. Ethiopia is not in the same place for all Sudanese like before. The border clashes or the border war was a good opportunity for each ruling party to escape their internal problems and to play a role in this war and to present themselves as the protector of their borders, Sudan from one side or Ethiopia from the other. There was also the refugees, the Ethiopian refugees that fled in large numbers to Al-Gadarib and Kassala regions in Sudan, and they were received with generosity from the Sudanese people, despite of the difficult situations related to the pandemic, coronavirus pandemic, and the difficulties that Sudan is facing after the difficult situations they felt in the transitional period. War in Ethiopia that was ignited at the same time when Sudan was facing the decisions of the 25th of October that ended the partnership between the military and the also the civil services, and also there was some compassion or empathy from the international world But after the ignition of the war in Ethiopia, it affected a lot on the dealing with Sudan incidents, as they looked at it as they are less impactful re- compared to what happens inside Ethiopia in terms of the bloodshed that happened there. So Ethiopian incidents took the light far from what happens in Sudan. Sudan now has circumstances that are relevant, and they still in a state of political and social tension nearly 4 years after the protests began in December 2018, which toppled the regime of ousted Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir. But still, the situations until now are still in tension, and they are fragile. And this is can be seen in the different demonstrations that we see in Khartoum and South Sudan and all areas requiring civil regime and to oust what they call the military regime and military rule. And also the situation in Sudan worsened in Darfur and other areas, and all of these things are connected to each other. This is a normal and extension of the African West, and also in the light of all of the international changes that are having darkening situations, and we are all witnessing this China West or American conflict that happens in the realms of the area in Mali and Africa and some African areas in Central Africa and Chad and Libya and many other areas around the world. And of course, this will cause some kind of instability in Africa and other areas as well. After 30 years of al-Bashir, where they controlled all kinds of rules, this led to negative situations, left the country, and situation in Sudan results including facing some of the famine that are witnessing in the east of Africa, the sister countries. And I think this needs to be mentioned because a number of our countries now in the African Horn, as well as in Sudan, 40% are threatened with hunger according to the estimations by the United Nations. And we all have seen the decisions of the 25th of October that ended the military aspect, the civilian component. One of the military components are not on one side as well. There are also the removal of the latter from participating in ruling the transitional period. Also, there are difficulties in conflict and negotiations. Saudi Arabia and the United Nations are trying to deal with this now, but there is a third party that is refusing that, which is the resistance in the street and militias like Abdul Aziz Al-Qanawa and Abdul Wahid Noor movements. And the military component is trying to fix their presence on the ground, but there are fears between the military and the rapid support and the other militias in all different regions of Sudan. There are also tensions in Sudan, like Islamic remains of the previous regime, and also there are fears of the situations in Sudan to be escalated. Also, a new military coup is feared as well. Also, there is fear of new or more international sanctions against Sudan, and we all have seen that previously that the decisions taken by the American Congress, even if they were implemented in Sudan, but they are afraid that it will be implemented in also Paris Club that has frozen the situation of Sudan debts. Now this path was frozen, and they will start canceling the 60%. They were about to delete or to remove the $60 billion the debts, and they were about to provide them with $8 billion of aids. But now Sudan is deprived from all of these procedures, and uh, challenges and the stresses are increasing in the recent months, although there are a lot of initiatives, like the initiatives led by the United Nations first, and after that with the African Union, and also IGAD joined. And I think that this is refused by a Liberty and Change movement, which is the prominent uh, opposition in the street, and other agencies as well. They refuse to enter because a lot of agencies were invited, and they think that these agencies were uh, pro-military now and pro the previous regime, and they are saying that this will is like a cause market. It will not achieve anything. A lot of initiatives and efforts are being exerted uh, in order to do this, and also in order because the number of the killed people when since 25th of October until now are 180 uh, pe people. And I think there are different reasons, uh, like, for example, the lack of sufficient effort and the lack of trust, and also because of the how because this is a very important of, and also because of the weakness and the insufficiency of the different aspects, and there are also different components that are very important to take care of between the national and the African components. And there are people who are trying to find this initiative. There are Islamists, the Communist Party, the professionals as well. So there is a need now to have a bigger role by Arab countries. Some say that this should be a fourth, and to be four countries to work on that, like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the Arab League, for example. And I think that uh, stability in Sudan is very important because the African Horn, it is important for the African Horn, for the whole African continent, and it's also important for the stability and safety of the whole Arab region. There will be disastrous implications if Sudan's situation is deteriorating. And what is happening now in the eastern part of Sudan is leading to closing the national road and closing the roads between the porters on the Red Sea, and the tensions that are happening in Darfur will lead to that led recently to hundreds of people killed. And we all know that there are wars and injured and conflicts that led previously to the separation of South Sudan, and now all other parts of Sudan are threatened. A lot of militias did not join the Juba peace agreement, and they will ask for assigning their own fate if their questions are not answered. I think in Sudan we need to deal with the reasonable requirements of the state, and Sudan has its specificity that Sudan requested moving to civilian country and democratic transformation. And I think responding to that will help the street to calm, and different Sudanese do not disagree on that, even if they are disagreeing on the nature of the civilians. Each party is trying to achieve the biggest win on the ground. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia said that they are not alternative for the third mechanism, for the triangle mechanism, and they are trying to help Sudanese parties to sit together, and this is something positive, and I think we need to build on that. And I think that the Arab world now has this big opportunity to exert all efforts, but with the condition that this effort shouldn't be biased to one party against the other. And the Arab media should as well play an important role in presenting Sudan and the issues of Sudan and the issues of the whole African Horn in a way that will be beneficial, so that we can retrieve back the spaces that we have lost in this region, and we need to coordinate between the big capitals. And I think leaving the situation in Sudan and the African Horn now as is will to and not intervening with the effective choice. This is the best choice for the Arab national security, because all of the interactions that are happening there uh, will have its consequences on us if left without intervention. I think we have an opportunity now, and the developments in Somalia is important. And despite of the negative things that we have seen before, but I think there is now a big opportunity in Somalia, with the condition that Sudan will be helped to build their country and their national organizations and national army, because without this army, terrorism will grow, because terrorism grows and the opportunity of the lack of state, and that there are external entities, enemy powers intervening in the Somalian national interests, and they are against the nation interests. Somalia now has positive developments. The handing over and handing and receiving of power happened uh, in peace and a peaceful manner, and this rare to happen in our region now. And I think the important thing is that the Somalia has suffering and needs the help of the sister countries. Also, Eritrea and Ethiopia needs negotiation, needs to build confidence, and needs also the assistance of the international community and the response of the colleagues in Somalia from all parties. And I think that a huge cooperation between our nation and the African Horn is needed, which is closely related to the Arab world, and all of the developments will be impacting us negatively and positively. So we need to have more cooperation in this important situation that we are witnessing in the region and the whole world, with these big developments that will have negative impacts on us, like the Ukrainian war, the international conflict that is increasing, and other issues and important matters. Thank you, Ms. Asma, for your intervention. Mr. Tikwaj, Mr. Peter Tikwaj, you are from South Sudan. How do you see the situation in Sudan and the relations between Sudan, the regional relations for South Sudan, and what is the importance of these relations for South Sudan and its relation to the northern part of Sudan and also Ethiopia, after we have heard the narration starting from Egypt? Now we will listen to the narration from South Sudan. The Egyptian direction was very clear. Thank you very much, Dr. Muhammad. In the beginning, I'd like to thank King Faisal Center for Research in Islamic Studies. Can you turn on your camera, please? I'd like to thank King Faisal Center for Research in Islamic Studies, and specifically Tabat Afriqiya newspaper, and of course Dr. Muhammad, and also Faris Center for Consultancy and Strategic Studies, and specifically Dr. Nermeen, as well as Dr. Asma Al-Husseini, as well as Mr. Abdul Qadir Muhammad Ali, and all the attendees and all the participants. The African Horn is considered a region that is witnessing many conflicts connected to internal conflicts. These internal conflicts always have the relations between these countries, and we have seen how each country and each party of these parties is supporting the other Tarfi, or maybe harboring some or sheltering some of the opposing powers. So instead of having cooperation between these countries in order to contribute to the development of the relations and all of the political and economic relations and creating of cooperation, but on the contrary, for long times or long periods, The relation between Ethiopia and Sudan, for example, these relations were intentioned for a long periods of time, and they were connected as also with each party sheltering the opposing groups from the other side. And but recently we found that there were some kind of understandings between Sudan and Ethiopia, but the relations were intense, and this is the general characteristics for the Sudanese-Ethiopian relations. Uh, Relations improve, then deteriorate, and this makes it very difficult to have understanding between these countries. And this is also related to the regimes or the internal systems of both countries. Also, regarding the profile of Al-Fashqa, the border area, we witnessed some of the armed or the military operations, but they were limited, and also the Renaissance Dam profile that is in disagreement with Sudan, and it is still now, and the Ethiopian party is escalating, and this indicates that there is a lack of improvement in the relations with the Sudanese party and the Ethiopian party. A connection was lost. Mr. Tikwaj, can you hear us? Mr. Tikwaj? Seems that Mr. Tikwaj, we lost connection with him. Are you there? Can you unmute, please?
طيب قد نعود للأستاذ.
انقطع.
أيوة تفضل.
Yes, connection was cut. Yes. So talking about the Renaissance Dam and the disagreements between Sudan and Ethiopia, this indicates that these disagreements will continue to exist unless two parties reach understanding regarding this file. But on the Ethiopian party, they are still escalating, and they're continuing to working on the Renaissance Dam without the participation of the other parties. Regarding, and also we have seen how that there is a similar opportunity for understanding between Eritrea and Sudan based on the potential of calmness and reconciliation in Ethiopia, and that the two parties in Ethiopia may have reconciliation by the end of this month, which disturbed the Eritrean side. So they are now trying to create understandings with the Sudanese party to guarantee the securing of the Sudanese front. Regarding the relations between Sudan or the south of Sudan and Ethiopia, it is still good relations. There was some deterioration of the relations, but it was negative. I mean, there was no escalation or any confrontation between the two sides. And it was, if we can say, neutrality from the Ethiopian side. But now, south of Sudan is working on developing its relations with Ethiopia. We have seen that there are understandings regarding the intelligence and security issues with between the two countries, and the officials of the two countries assured that South Sudan and Ethiopia are strong relations and connected to the Ethiopian role to the independence of South Sudan and supporting the people of the public, the people's movement while supporting South Sudan. So relations between Ethiopia and South Sudan are old and depended on the military aspect cooperation in general. The internal situation in South of Sudan will not allow any intervention or participation in any war, external war, or any escalation that will impact the internal situation. South of Sudan now is trying to preserve the relations that were achieved in the previous periods, good relations with Sudan. Also, South Sudan was a mediator between Sudanese parties, and they are still, South Sudan is still sponsoring the Juba or peace agreement in the south of Sudan. And we have seen that South Sudan started to or their allies or the opposing groups in Sudan that they were sheltering for a long time. So I think all parties should be responsible for that, and this is connected also to what we call the foreign presence in the Horn of Africa. And I think that the Horn of Africa was occupied by many external foreigners or send some envoys to deal with that threatened area of the Horn of Africa. Thank you very much. I'll stop here and I'll intervene if there are any question between the speakers or the audience. Thank you, Mr. Tikwaj, for this presentation. Now we'll go to Dr. Nermeen Tawfiq, the researcher and the coordinator of Pharos, the general coordinator of Pharos Center for Consultancy and Strategic Studies. So how can we see the situation based on Somalia, given that you have written a lot about Somalia and its participation, and you have scientific participations about the situation in Somalia? So electing a new president, will that lead soon to the new national institutions that are stable, and how will they deal with a Shabab, Somalian Shabab movement, which is the terroristic threat that is threatening the whole region, not only Somalia, but all of the eastern part of Africa and what's under Africa? Dr. Nermeen, go ahead. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Somalia is a very important country in the Horn of Africa, and they have a very important geostrategic location. They have these important maritime traits that are important for the whole world, and that's why the international community is taking much care of Somalia. Somalia had a situation with the collapse of, or the non-state situation, the collapse of the state after Ziad Berri started in 1991. Somalia witnessed this civil war between all of the components, and the organizations of the country were collapsed. And they have been in the no state situation for long years. And we found that since 2007, terrorist groups like Shabab al-Mujahideen, which is a very dangerous movement, they started to emerge, and they announced their location, and they carried their weapons against all those who do not support them. And they, because of the security void that was there in Somalia, they could control maybe 85% of Somalia in the south and the middle. And after that, when the peacekeeping delegation of the African Union started to enter Somalia, they tried to face the movement, but the movement stayed there, and they started terroristic groups, not only in South Somalia, but also in the neighboring areas like Uganda and Kenya. And recently, we started the situation of the difficult situations of, like, after the Fernego election or era ended, and the obstructed labor, and in February 2021. But before the Somalian elections, Fernego announced that Somalian elections cannot be done in this situation, but the opposition and most of the parties refused that, and there were a lot of clashes that continued for 1 year until recently. We can say that there was a choice of the heads of the cabinet and the parliament and the Congress, and they voted for the new president Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud. So I think that this was so Somalia avoided a problem that would have led them to civil war without elections. So here we find the basic problems facing Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud is that to group all the components of the political aspect or landscape together, and also the security location. Until now, Shabab al-Mujahideen movement is still a risk or a threat to the whole region, and they announced their allegiance to Al-Qaeda in 2014, and also until now, or in 2012, and now they are trying, or ISIS is trying to penetrate Somalia. In 2014 or 2015, ISIS started their own wilaya or location in Somalia, and that Shabab al-Mujahideen will will hold allegiance to them or pledge allegiance to them, but majority of Shabab refused that, and they stayed connecting to ISIS. So that's why one arm of Shabab Mujahideen separated and started to be in the north of Somalia and pledged allegiance to ISIS. This means that maybe they're close to Aden or the Arab Gulf, for example, facing Somalia from the other side, which is Yemen, which is close to Arab Gulf states. So any worries in this area will affect and consequence the Gulf countries and also the Nile, many of the countries of or the Nile Basin countries. Another important thing, which is ISIS trying to country after what they received in Syria and Iraq, since to Syria and Iraq, they are been searching for alternative regions, and Africa for them is a haven for them in order to, because of the lack of security and geography that is easy to spread in. So recently they started to emerge in many countries that they weren't in before, like for example countries close to the African Horn like Democratic Congo, like Mozambique, and they are trying now to create what they call the nation of the heart of Africa. So they executed a terroristic operation in 2021 in Mozambique, and they could hold a very important coastal area there that is rich with natural resources, and also in, the Democratic United Forces in Democratic Congo, they are rebels from Uganda, and they are there in Democratic Congo areas. And recently they announced they pledged their that they are pro ISIS, and they announced it in Kampala of an operation. They declared their responsibility, and it is a vital area and led to killing of many people. So this leads the opportunity that countries in Africa and many other places should coordinate together in terms of security in order to exchange information, and countries that has experience in countering terrorism should help and assist these countries to face them. Arab countries as well, their existence, their presence is important, because the void and the lack of state or not assisting these countries increases the problems, whether on the political side or even on the military and security side. In addition to the humanitarian aspects and the difficult situations that these countries are witnessing, especially with drought, with desertification, with climate change. So we need to be there for humanitarian aspects as well. This is very important. This was a glimpse of the situation from the security point of view in the African Horn, that are facing Sheikh Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud, the president, with the existence of Shabab Mujahideen continuing to exist in Somalia. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Nermeen. Now, Mr. Abdul Qadir Muhammad Ali, regarding Eritrea, the Eritrean regime, as we know, was a part of a four-sided alliance that was established by the head of the cabinet in Ethiopia since they ruled, and he started to find this regional reconciliation so that Ethiopia will be the axis or the pivot, the effective pivot in the region. Now, after Eritrea participating in the internal war between Tigray and the federal government, how will that impact the situation and the policies of the Ethiopian regime and their regional relations? First of all, I'd like to thank King Faisal Center and Farous Center, and especially Dr. Muhammad and Dr. Nermeen for this invitation. And I hope that what I present will be fruitful for the colleagues and the attendees. Like you mentioned, the region is now witnessing a turning point, and I think we'll witness a new situation in the African Horn that is different from the previous 4 or 5 years. I'll speak about 6 main points about Somalia, Ethiopia, and Eritrea. And I'll try to speak briefly about Somalia, and I'll speak more about Eritrea and Ethiopia. First, as for Somalia, the first point I'd like to speak about is the election of Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud as the president of Somalia. The most important implication of that on the regional level is that the high probability of the disintegration of the three-sided alliance, Eritrea, Somalia, and Somalia. The most important indication is that Eritrea situation against Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud, they didn't send a congratulation message, and they didn't send a delegation to participate in the celebration. And also there are media sources speaking about that Eritrea will start searching about the fate of the Somalian soldiers who were in Eritrea, and some United Nations reports said that they were there in the war. This is a point of disagreement. Another thing is that the US is deciding to resend their troops back to Somalia, which has the regional implications. So I think that this US decision is linked to the geopolitical and superpowers conflicts in the Horn of Africa, and I think it is also related to the developments in the relation between Eritrea and Russia, and the high escalation between the two countries in terms of relations. And this is something that I'll speak about in the coming theme. In the Ethiopian aspect, I'll speak about two important developments. First is the reconciliation between the federal government and the Tigray Public Movement of Liberation. Also, they're trying to get rid of Fano and Umur Liberation Army. As for the reconciliation, I wrote since last February about initial indications of peace in Tigray, and these are increasing indications. And the last one was the head of the cabinet, Abiy Ahmed, comment in current 4th of June that there is a committee that will be formed in order to study cooperation with Tigray Liberation Army. And also, Governor McHale announced a message saying that they are willing to send a high level delegation to discuss the different situations. And also, the drivers for them to start the reconciliation is that for the governmental aspect, the head of the cabinet will implement his condition to start ceasing of fire, and that Tigray forces should be withdraw from the areas from Afra and Amhara. And this happened with the governmental forces weight balance, and also the months of war proved that they cannot militarily overcome Tigray Liberation Army, and also the economic consequences. We're speaking about a huge economic amount for the military machinery, destruction of the also infrastructure, and also the economic sanctions. As for Tigray, the main drivers for entering in peace negotiations that this public liberation entities are now sure that it is not possible for them to get rid of Abiy Ahmed by force now, and also millions are threatened with hunger in Tigray, and also the total destruction in the region and its infrastructure, and also the economic destruction that occurred to that entity. Also, the obstacles of peace between the two parties are a lot. First, lack of confidence, and also the currently, for example, King Jacob Rahawit, the spokesperson of that front, said that there are things that are unnegotiable. First is to preserve the military of Tigray, also to control all the areas of Tigray, and also starting a referendum, which is a very tricky situation. And they say that this is non-negotiable, and this indicates that in the future they want to be like south of Sudan. They want to separate. And I think this is very difficult. In terms of the government, the head of the cabinet in Ethiopia with Amhari, they connected this ally to get rid of Tigray Liberation Army, and this is something that I'm talking about in the coming periods. The second development is also the government trying to get rid of the Amhari national aspects like Fano and Oro, but I'm going to speak about the first one only because it is very important. Fano was an integral part of the military non-official situations. They worked on confronting Tigray forces in Amhara and Afra last autumn, and that's why it was unexpected what the government did, but this is linked to many decisions nationally and regionally and internationally. Regionally, API wants, Ahmed, the head of the cabinet, wants to market himself as someone who is capable of fulfilling the order of law, and also that to get rid of all of the militias. As for the regional aspect, they want to get rid of any power that get rid of any power that will be an obstacle in the law, and also Amhari has a radical point of view regarding dealing with the situations. Regionally, the Ethiopian government are wanting to get rid of any force that will initiate any conflict clashes, especially with Sudan, and also they're trying to avoid any governmental and any non-governmental entities that has public powers, especially those who trained thousands of their youth after the war started. Internationally, this is a message to the whole world that is asking these militias to get rid of west of Tigray to get the wheel of the reconciliation going. Generally speaking, we cannot separate Fano confrontation from the reorganization of the Ethiopian inside house, so that the government will be able to control all of the political aspect tools. And this role, Amhara, they were very prominent in the previous area, is going back for the interest of Oromo. And Amhara are scared that they will be an scapegoat for the rest of the issues. And they are also afraid that Kavu will leave them unprotected if there is no reconciliation and the war starts again. So there were different kinds of objections, and this will lead to a lot of objections if the government doesn't find situation. As for Eritrea, I'll also speak about a very important thing. First, the development of the Russian-Eritrean relations. First of all, there was an between Asra and Addis Ababa develops into a break as Ethiopia, which continues since 2019. There are indications for different disagreements regarding Tigray file, like for example the comment that was established by the Eritrean officials and the Ministry of Media regarding these different situations. This comment first is important that the PFLP plan to attack targeting Eritrea and the Eritrean people. Also, the comment was directly and indirectly criticizing the Ethiopian dealing with the Tigray province or region, and they said that it was because of the foreign pressures, and they considered also that humanitarian aids to Tigray stopping is from the Western powers in order to support the liberation Tigray forces before the start. And also they said that they are saying that the government in Addis Ababa is responsible for any implications on the borders of Eritrea. This wasn't the only indication of the tensions between Eritrea presidency and Ethiopian head of government. The head of government sent a congratulation for the Independence Day of Eritrea, but the Eritrea did not send any congratulations on the contrary of the previous years. In addition to Amhara and Eritrea governments are agreeing in many core areas, but the Amhara movement did not find any agreement from Eritrea, and that's how losing the biggest alliance within the internal landscape in Ethiopia. Also, the other developments regarding Eritrea, and it witnessed the visit of Eritrean officials to Moscow, which was a qualitative development. Eritrea was the only country that did not vote on the condemnation of Russia again and the United Nations regarding the Ukrainian experience. And I think that there are two important things. First, the current economic changes like the Ethiopian reconciliation that Eritrea is seriously examining because it will have any sometimes going back before the peace arrangements before the war, and also the Cold War ghosts is flowing in the horizons in the region. Also, they need to deal with this situation. They need support, militarily, economic support, because of their war, their role in the war in Tigray. And I think China and Russia will provide them with the support. So that's why in the recent areas we found that Russia is thinking of establishing a military base in Russia, and the Eritrean president embassy said in Russia that they are welcoming any logistics center or base for Russia and Eritrea. So we can say that Eritrea now is positioning itself in the future map with the Chinese-Russian camp in the coming Cold War. And this indicates that it is indicated also by Porfiry Dekra in the Independence Day last May, focused on the change on the international landscape and the failure of the West and the beginning of the multipolar system. In the end, I'd like to conclude with the different scenarios that are expected and the borders according to first scenario that it will lead to the different situation, and I think that this will lead very important. For example, Eritrea, because of a lot of problems, and Ethiopia will try to avoid direct war. The second scenario is to avoid that by wide military attack, and I think that Tigray are on the Eritrean aspect, and I think this is very dangerous, and the Eritrean army will be very brutal, and I think this will not be without accordance with the Ethiopian government, because the region will be open for federal government, and they will be within two attacks. And also Tigray on the Eritrean or in agreement with the Ethiopian government, and this is something that is difficult to be agreed because it doesn't go well with the seizing powerful card that the federal government is trying to work with now. So, and this is very dangerous in terms of weakening Addis Ababa, in terms of the agreeing. Another situation, the third option, a full-scale attack by Eritrean forces on Tigray's defenses, as indicated by leaks of Eritrea's acquisition. This scenario is linked to the ongoing shifts in the international landscape and the threats to move the conflict between the major powers from Eastern Europe to East Africa. But the extent to which this scenario can be achieved is fundamentally linked to Addis Ababa's position, which brings us back to the second scenario of and further casts doubts on it that the aforementioned Eritrean comment was defensive, particularly by direct invitation to Western countries to prevent the Tigray from carrying out any their plan described. Anyway, any kind of war, this will be in favor of Tigray and Eritrea. They are trying to get the international community to be more involved in the Ethiopian trade. And Asmara's interest is in confuse the reconciliation and to pressure Addis Ababa to get far from the current path. Our estimation is that scenario will be the first, because full war will be very costly for everyone. And also there is international community that reconciliation is be better, the Ethiopian reconciliation. So the importance of this reconciliation increases when thinking that the war will open back the road for terrorist groups in the Ethiopian landscape. So generally speaking, we are about to have a new landscape in the African Horn. The most important dynamics is the election of the President Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud, and the reconciliation is becoming increasingly important. Will it follow its end? What are the implications? Thank you for listening. Thank you, Mr. Abdul Qadir, for this fruitful presentation. Now we'll go back to the interventions and the feedback. Find some questions from the attendees. Mr. Khalid Waddani is asking about the different interventions in the African Horn area, and Mr. Abdul Qadir mentioned that some of them, but there are also some indications from Mr. Waddani to the role of China, Chinese role, and having a Chinese envoy, a new one in the region. So is there any Chinese interest regarding what happened recently in the African Horn area in terms of electing a new president in Somalia, or movement of situations in Ethiopia, or in the region in general? Ms. Asma, is it possible to answer this question to see what's going on? And we'll go back to the rest of the entities. I'd like to congratulate my colleagues for all of their interventions. International interventions are all, of course, difficult. There is also not only a new Chinese envoy, but there also a new US envoy that may visit the region soon. All of these international powers that intervened for one party or another, they will, by the end of the day, they will realize that their own interests are threatened in the region by these wars and these solutions that they try to find by the different parties of combat or the different political parties in each of these African Horn countries. So these countries will find themselves now in confrontation with trying to rescue these, stop these wars that are against all of their interests and their investments. Russia, China are exerting their efforts to find military agreements with many African countries to find a place for its foot on the Red Sea, whether by Sudan or through Eritrea. So these interests are threatened unless there is an attempt to find peaceful solutions that will accommodate all parties that cannot be marginalized from any peace situation. Mr. Tivash also, that is very important to solve the Renaissance Dam situation, because if unsolved, there will be always tension, and tension will also be accumulated with other tensions. The conflict that happened at the borders between Sudan and Ethiopia, I think papers are being mixed within these conflicts and clashes, and I think the international community is trying to find a solution for this kind of things in the region. And I think one of the most important solutions is the Renaissance Dam, because it increases the tension in the region. Thank you, Ms. Asma. Dr. Narmeen, there is a question about Djibouti. We did not speak about Djibouti and the impact of it and what happens to the region now, especially that Djibouti is close to Somalia, and at the same time, it has competitiveness, competition on the ports with Eritrea. So regarding this Ababa and Eritrea and the different relations, how can Djibouti be impacted? Can you answer this question? Yes, Djibouti is one of the countries that from the different parts, and there are 6 countries: Somalia, Eritrea, and Djibouti. And Djibouti, and I think that Djibouti represent now not only international competition, but there are also many military bases in this area. And I will go back to speak about the importance of the African Horn regarding other powers, and they are trying to impact the course of the international commerce or trade. So we know that trade, commerce, and maritime paths are considered now very important for all countries of the world. So this makes us able to understand why big countries or superpowers in the world are there with military bases in Djibouti. And if we say that there is competitiveness between Eritrea and Djibouti in terms of the ports, this goes back to the same point. If we look at the most important maritime ports, we found that the Indian Ocean, the Red Sea, and the Bab al-Mandab trade. And I think all the importance of the region is because it's the geographical location in terms of the geostrategic aspect. So Djibouti, like the rest of the Horn of Africa, they're trying to, first and foremost, for their own interests, they are opening their lands for many countries. Italy, Russia, China, and many other countries are there with military bases because of the importance of this area and a strategic city location. Thank you, Dr. Narmeen. Mr. Muhammad Abdul Qadir Muhammad Ali, how do you see what happened in Djibouti? Because the important thing is that Ethiopia, when they started to have this regional reconciliation, they moved to Eritrea in order to make Djibouti able to do that. So what happened previously is that Ethiopia depended on the Djibouti ports, but with the reconciliation between Djibouti and Eritrea, Ethiopia is now trying to use, because of their concession with Eritrea and Ethiopia, Ethiopia is trying to use Eritrean ports, and also Ethiopia is trying to use Somalian ports and also some ports on the eastern part. So how do you see the Djibouti affected by all of these conflicts, especially that they are at one stage they were the victim of the Eritrean Somalian proximity, and they felt that, and Djibouti started to be like isolated in terms of the triangle agreement between three parties agreement between Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia. How do you see that, Mr. Abdul Qadir? As for Djibouti, looking at Djibouti economy, they are a poor country, poor of resources. The most important resources for them are the land. So that's why they are benefiting from the geostrategic location that's very important at the entrance of Bab el-Mandeb Strait and to rent this land. And the second income sources, ports are very important for their income for Djibouti. Also regarding the dynamics of the conflict within the African inside, any proximity between Eritrea and Ethiopia is necessarily will be damaging the Djibouti interests, because the ports that are closer to Ethiopia and they were used by Ethiopia are the Eritrean ports. And because of the war between Eritrea and Ethiopia, the 1998 and 2000, and the closure of the borders between the two countries and the hostile status that started and that lasted until 2018, the biggest winner, or one of the biggest winners, was Djibouti, because Ethiopian trade started to use Djibouti porters, and 95% of Ethiopian maritime trade was through Djibouti, and this provided a big amount of money for their treasury in Djibouti. With the openness of relations between Eritrea and Ethiopia and the different conversations about reusing Eritrean ports and regional projects to develop Eritrean ports and serving the Ethiopian serves of the Eritrean debts. Also, Djibouti had border clashes between Eritrea and Djibouti. There was a limited war there. The most prominent developments that happened after the openness between Eritrea and Ethiopian Eritrean relations, they tried to find this three parties alliance between Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia. They were trying to isolate Djibouti, and now the current situations and developments on the scene of the African Horn and the election of Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud, there was this integration of the three parties alliance and the war between Ethiopia and Eritrea, or maybe the deterioration expected between the relations of Ethiopia and Eritrea. This, at the end of the day, will serve the Djibouti interest. Djibouti is worried that the strategy of Ethiopia to diversify their ports because of the recent experience of war for Ethiopia, the main goal is that Tigray liberating armies went in the area and they closed the road between Djibouti and Addis Ababa route, so they couldn't put all of their economy in one area that is outside of their control and can be closed if there is any deterioration for any reason. So Ethiopian policy and strategy was to diversify ports, whether in Somalia, in Kenya. Also, they spoke about ports in Sudan and Ethiopia. In Ethiopia, these developments are concerning for Djibouti, but what's going on now, generally speaking, the deterioration of the relation between Eritrea and Ethiopia, Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud being elected, the deterioration of the alliance of three sides, this is positive for Djibouti and this is for the Djibouti interests. As for one remark regarding the China's situation, China's sovereignty or there or power is there. The first military base outside of China is in Djibouti, and for China, Djibouti is the entrance for the African continent, and the African Horn is a big investment opportunities for China. They started a lot in Ethiopia and the infrastructure connecting Djibouti and Ethiopia. China is also investing now in Eritrea. Eritrea, with the current developments or recent developments in Ethiopia, decided to enter the Road and Belt Initiative by China after being hesitant for a long time. This enhanced the role of China. Also, China now is a main player in the African Horn. They conducted a conference days ago to try to solve the issues in the African Horn. What is the effectiveness of that? This is for doubts, but at the end of the day, they are a main player, an important player, and an effective player in the balances in the African Horn. While the US was targeting continuously Dr. Abiy Ahmed, China clearly supported him and supported the Ethiopian government. This means that it is a conflict of powers between the United States and China is present clearly in the African Horn. And the African Horn is now turning into a hot spot for the new Cold War in the future. Thank you. There's another question about Sudan. The international attempt to create or to establish military bases in Sudan, or maybe investing in the ports, these regional efforts and the international efforts, Russians, for example, were promised to be able to establish a military base on the eastern part of Sudan. And also, a while ago, we knew that the United Arab Emirates is also trying to invest in some Sudanese ports. So how do you see the importance of this and its implications on the Sudanese situation, Mr. Tigwa? An example, we have seen the desire from some big super countries, superpowers, and some of the also regional competition like Turkey. They're trying to have a base in Sudan specifically, and having one or more of the bases in Sudan may help the current regime within the internal distresses or disputes until they are able to secure or to find support, external support, because Sudan is currently facing suffering from the deterioration of the Sudanese economy, in addition to some political instability and political problems, especially. And also, this is one of the tools that they can be used for external policies. And we have seen that like Djibouti is doing now. But in Sudan, there are disagreements. There is no agreement or no accord between the internal components in Sudan, and this what may prolong or delay the establishment of these bases in Sudan. So there is acceptance from some parties, and some internal bodies are trying to face connections between the Sudanese state because due to the political disagreements and the large number of groups that are now opposing, are trying to turn the control from military to civilian entities. So Sudan currently needs to try to find an agreement, an internal agreement that will allow to enhance the external policies. If this doesn't happen, we cannot speak about external relations for any of the countries we're speaking about. The Horn of Africa region is facing indeed a lot of intervention from the regional entity powers, and we are going to see that in the coming days and years. And this also close to what happens in the Ukrainian-Russian war. All countries were affected by this situation. So that's why the Horn of Africa region will also be the alternative for the coming situations. And they started these steps as well in order to deal with these countries, in order to compensate for the losses that happened due to the situation witnessed by the world as a consequence for the Russian-Ukrainian war. So that's why the African Horn is considered as not outside of the international interactions, but we have seen how these countries' economies were affected by the Russian war and the food supplies prices going up and a lot of things, and fuel as well. So Sudan alike will have an interest in finding an alternative in compensating what they're facing in terms of the internal situation in Sudan. Also, the Red Sea region is also considered an important strategic path for trade, for international trade, and that's why it needs to be secured comprehensively along the coasts of the Red Sea. And it is the Horn of Africa region. We cannot expect competitiveness of these countries or big powers in Ethiopia and in Djibouti as well as Eritrea without that be connected to Sudan, because this is a full securing of that path, and it's also a path that connects Suez Canal, which is one of the most important and powerful traits for the international trade in general. Thank you, Mr. Ms. Asma. As when I mentioned recently, when you talked about a Russian military base in Sudan, and it seems that there is some retreating in that. How do you see that? Do you have any analysis for that point in specific? Yes, in fact, Sudan and the eastern coasts are under the lights of interest of many superpowers. Russia have tried that before, and Turkey also is trying in Sawakin port that we're targeting, and many other regional powers. But now, after the vice president of the Major General Major Mohammed al-Wasfi visit and promising that Russia will have a military base there, this was heard and influencing a lot in the United States and the West, and the United States will not leave Sudan to be easy to be taken by Russia, not only the eastern ports, but also the gold of Sudan, and also the confirmation of having many troops of Fagmar Russian groups present in Darfur. All of these things are concerning for the United States, are concerning for the West. That, in my opinion, the United States started to activate its tools, whether through US tools itself, like the decisions in front of the Congress regarding some military leaders. They are trying waving them now in front of the military leaders, and also the European mechanisms that will be used as well through the international organizations. And also at the end of the day, we'll find that the current situation now in Sudan and in the African Horn, and also in the coast and the desert and Libya, they are ignited by this Western, American, Chinese, Russian power or clash or Cold War against our African countries and its resources. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Asma. Dr. Nermeen, is there any vision regarding what might be the situation of the African Horn and the coasts of the Red Sea in the future, in the near future, within the light of these regional tensions and the international competition? What are the horizons or future horizons of the region? And we can conclude with this question. We can say that the African solution is always better than any interventions, And as Ms. Asma mentioned, the international competition that is currently happening in the African region, we found also competition between more than one power, especially in the African Horn region or the west of the region in general. There is huge competition now between Russia and France. So within these variables, when we look at the Ukrainian-Russian war and its developments and its implication on the whole world and the countries, we're not parties in this war, but the food security and this impacted us a lot. So this indicates that whatever the internal clashes, the solutions should always be internal, because in the whole world that we're living in now, economic regional blocks are very important, inevitable, and the African Horn countries and African countries have many resources that if we have blocks on integration, all parties will be winning, if we can say so. So I hope that all problems will be left aside and the African Union will have a better role in integration between the different African countries. And if we look, recently we started to talk within the African Union about a free economic zone, and they started implementing it, and this zone will lead the cooperation between the African countries. We're speaking about the African Horn countries or other surrounding countries, or even collaboration between African Arab countries and the African Gulf countries, given that the interests will be mutual for both, but will be much better than foreign interventions that will seek only their own interests before the interests of the African countries. We have seen for years that France, for example, was draining the resources from West Africa. So I think it is the opportunity now for us to have African cooperation and Arab-African cooperation for the interests of us all. Thank you very much, Dr. Nermeen. So there are some requests for questions and interventions, but in fact, our time is finished and we cannot speak more. I'd like to thank those who participated through their questions and interventions. I'd like to thank everyone, the attendees and the speakers, the guests, Mr. Abdul Qadir, Mohammed Abdul Qadir from Eritrea, and also Ms. Asma Al-Husseini, the chief editor of Al-Ahram, and also Mr. Qarwash Beter, the researcher from South of Sudan, and Dr. Nimin Tawfiq, the specialized coordinator about the African studies and the coordinator of our Center for Consultancy and Strategic Studies. Thank you very much, and we hope we meet you soon in next occasions with lectures from King Faisal Center for Research and Islamic Studies. This is me, Mohammed Sweidli, the director of the African Studies program at the King Faisal Center for Research and Islamic Studies. Thank you very much, and peace be upon you all. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.
وعليكم السلام. شكرا جزيلا.